Pyramid is an American television game show franchise that has aired several versions domestically and internationally. The original series, The $10,000 Pyramid, debuted March 26, 1973, and spawned 7 subsequent Pyramid series. The game featured 2 contestants, each paired with a celebrity. Players attempt to guess a series of words or phrases based on descriptions given to them by their teammates. The title refers to the show's pyramid-shaped gameboard, featuring 6 categories arranged in a triangular fashion. The various Pyramid series won a total of 9 Daytime Emmys for Outstanding Game Show, second only to Jeopardy, which has won 13. Dick Clark is the host most commonly associated with the show, having hosted every incarnation from 1973–88 with the exception of the original version of the $25,000 Pyramid, which aired in syndication from 1974 until 1979 and was hosted by Bill Cullen. The $100,000 Pyramid was revived for a brief 1991 run with John Davidson hosting. In 2002 the series was revived as Pyramid with Donny Osmond hosting for 2 seasons. The most recent edition of the series, GSN's The Pyramid, was hosted by Mike Richards and aired for a single 40-episode season before it was cancelled in 2012. Reruns of The Pyramid, as well as the $25,000 Pyramid, are currently shown on GSN. History = broadcast history = The $10,000 Pyramid, with host Dick Clark, made its network debut on March 26, 1973 and was a ratings hit, sustaining its ratings even when episodes were delayed or preempted by the Watergate hearings. A year later, the ratings temporarily declined and CBS cancelled it. The show was quickly picked up by ABC, and began airing on that network on May 6, 1974. As per CBS custom at the time with celebrity game shows, 3 weeks of episodes for CBS were taped in Hollywood, at CBS Television City, Studio 31. The rest originated in New York at what is now the Ed Sullivan Theater, moving to ABC's Elysee Theater when it switched networks. On September 20, 1982, the series returned to the CBS daytime lineup as the $25,000 Pyramid, again with Clark as host, but now taped in Los Angeles full-time at CBS Television City's Studio 33 and remained there for the entire run and the brief 1988 return. The original $25,000 Pyramid and the $50,000 Pyramid were taped in the Elysee Theater in New York, and the original version of the $100,000 Pyramid taped at Studio 33 in Hollywood. The revival of the $100,000 Pyramid, hosted by John Davidson, ran from January until December 1991 and taped in Studio 31. Pyramid, hosted by Donny Osmond, ran from September 16, 2002 to September 10, 2004 and was taped at Sony Pictures Studios. The Pyramid was taped at the CBS Studio Center. Later developments Following CBS's cancellation of Guiding Light in April 2009, Pyramid was one of 3 potential series considered as a replacement for the veteran soap opera. During the tapings that took place in June of that year, the top prize was raised to a potential $1 million. CBS passed on Pyramid and opted to pick up Let's Make a Deal, hosted by Wayne Brady, as Guiding Light's replacement. Several months later, in December 2009, CBS announced the cancellation of another long-running soap opera, As the World Turns. Pyramid was once again among the series being considered as a potential replacement. CBS ordered a 3rd pilot on April 9, 2010. Andy Richter was identified as a potential host. On May 18, 2011, TBS announced development of a possible new version of Pyramid, again to be hosted by Andy Richter. It was later announced that the show was not picked up. Another pilot, titled The Pyramid, was taped on June 16, 2012. On July 12, 2012, GSN announced The Pyramid had been picked up and would premiere on the network on September 3, with Mike Richards hosting the show. Other personnel Bob Clayton was the series' original announcer and performed these duties until his death in 1979. Alan Coulter and Steve O'Brien shared the primary announcer role until the $50,000 Pyramid ended production in 1981. Substitutes included Frederick Foy, John Corsier, Dick Heatherton, Scott Vincent, and Ed Jordan. When the series was revived and production moved to California in 1982, Jack Clark became the announcer and held a position until 1985. Johnny Gilbert became the primary announcer for the $25,000 pyramid while Charlie O'Donnell took the job for the $100,000 pyramid when it launched that fall. Both Gilbert and O'Donnell would substitute for each other on their respective series. Other substitutes included Jerry Bishop, Rod Roddy, Bob Hilton, and Dean Goss. For the 1991 revival, Gilbert and Goss were both featured announcers and frequent panelist Henry Pollack who also announced for several weeks. John Cramer announced the 2002-04 version, and J.D. Roberto announced the pyramid. Mike Gargiulo directed through 1981, with Bruce Burmester replacing him until the end of the 1991 revival. The original theme tune was Tuning Up by Ken Aldin. In 1982, it was replaced by an original composition by Bob Cobbett, which was also used on the 1991 revival. Barry Coffing and John Blaylock composed the theme of the 2002-04 version, and Alanette composed for the pyramid. Gameplay equals front game equals, the pyramid's gameboards, both in the main game and in the winner's circle bonus round, featured 6 categories arranged in a pyramid, with 3 categories on the bottom row, 2 on the middle row, and 1 on the top. In the main game, a category's position on the board was not an indicator of its difficulty. In the winner's circle, categories became progressively more difficult the higher they were on the board. The game featured 2 teams, each composed of a celebrity and a regular contestant. At the beginning of the game, the teams were shown 6 categories, whose titles gave vague clues to their possible meaning. Once the category was chosen, its exact meaning was given. For up to 30 seconds, one player conveyed to the other clues to a series of items belonging to a category. 1 point was scored for each item correctly guessed. If a word was passed, the giver could not go back to that word, but if the receiver knew the word later on and guessed it, the team still earned a point. On the Osmond version, a team that passed on any words could return to them if time permitted, but if a word was guessed correctly after it had been passed, it would not count until the word was returned to and correctly guessed then. Originally, on the CBS version, there were 8 possible items in a category. This was reduced to 7 when the show moved to ABC, and reduced again to 6 for the Osmond-hosted version. Subsequent pilots returned to the 7 in 30 seconds format, which became the standard for the 2012 version. The short-lived junior partner pyramid format kept the 7 words, but increased the time limit to 35 seconds. Using any part of the answer and giving a clue resulting in the item being disqualified. Originally, the celebrity gave the clues in both the first and third rounds, and the contestant in the second round. Eventually, the rules were changed so that teams were given the opportunity to choose which player would give the clues in the third round. This was reverted for the Osmond version. The teams alternated in the first 2 rounds, and the team with the lower score played first in the third round. Whoever had the higher score after 3 rounds advanced to the winner's circle. In the 1970s and 1980s versions, in the rare event that players were mathematically unable to at least tie their opponent before the opponent has had his or her last turn, the game ended and the remaining categories were left unplayed. However, the eliminated player returned on the next game. Winner's circle equals, the winner of the front game played the winner's circle, whereby the goal was for the team to communicate 6 categories within 60 seconds, using only a list of words or phrases that fit the given category. One player was the clue giver while the other had to guess what was being described. Successfully guessing all 6 categories won the contestant the top announced prize. Otherwise, the contestant won cash depending on the amounts the correctly guessed categories were worth. The bottom 3 categories were the easiest, the 2 on the middle level were more difficult and the category at the top was typically the most difficult. Clue givers could pass on a category and then return to it if time allowed. Returning champions and winnings limits equals, on the 1970s daytime version, contestants were allowed to remain on the show until they were defeated or won the winner's circle. Under the $10,000 format, a player who won the winner's circle was allowed to keep all earlier winnings. Under the $20,000 format, the player's total was merely augmented to the amount won in the winner's circle. The syndicated versions featured no returning champions prior to 1985. During the 1970s syndicated version, if a player won a bonus prize, then went on to win the $25,000 top prize, the value of the bonus was deducted from the champion's total, leaving them with exactly $25,000. This version did not feature returning champions. On all versions from 1982 onward, all front game bonus winnings remained intact in the event of a $25,000 win. On the $25,000 and $100,000 versions of the show, the same two contestants competed for both halves of the episode. A player who won one of the two games on the episode played the winner's circle for $10,000. A player who won both games played the second winner's circle for a total of $25,000. On all versions from 1982 to 91, a player who won both games of an episode became the champion and returned on the next show. If each player won one game, the player with the higher total in the winner's circle became champion. If the two players won equal amounts of money in the winner's circle, both returned on the next show. Contestants from 1982 to 91 were allowed to remain on the show until defeated, up to a maximum of 5 shows. Champions on the CBS version also retired after exceeding the network's winnings limit. This was originally $25,000, but was increased to $50,000 on October 22, 1984 and to $75,000 on September 29, 1986. Players were allowed to keep a maximum of $25,000 in excess of the limit. Pyramid and the Pyramid did not have returning champions. On Pyramid, the goal was once again to try to win $25,000. However, this required a player to get to and win the winner's circle twice. If the player made a second trip without having won the first, he/she was given another chance at $10,000. If the player managed to win both, he/she won the $25,000 and automatically qualified for the $100,000 tournament. On the Pyramid, each winner's circle was played for a base of $10,000. For each category that the player and celebrity swept, an additional $5,000 was added to the potential prize, with the maximum prize for a trip to the winner's circle being $25,000 for each contestant. International versions. The British version was called The Pyramid Game and ran intermittently from 1981 to 1990, with Steve Jones as host. Donny Osmond hosted a short-lived 2007 revival, which used the same music package and a similar set as the 2002 American revival hosted by Osmond. In 2009, Sony created an Australian version of the junior partner pyramid called simply Pyramid. This version was hosted by Shura Taft until 2012, with Graham Matters taking over the following year. References. External links. Official website, The $25,000 Pyramid at the Internet Movie Database 1982 €87/1988 US version, Pyramid at the Internet Movie Database 2002 €04 US version, The Pyramid at the Internet Movie Database 2012 US version.